In last week's episode, we wandered around parts of downtown Manhattan and New Jersey to talk about the pace of money determining the pace of life. Let's see what you had to say. RootBeerResnet on the subreddit points out what was maybe an unclear connection that we made at the end of the episode, and I just want to clear this up. What I did not intend to say is that high-frequency trading had an effect on the subprime mortgage crisis, but rather that high-frequency trading tactics, lots of the high-speed, especially algorithmic trading tactics that hedge funds and a lot of other places employ are very complicated and very, very secretive, much like the way the mortgage-backed derivatives that led to the subprime mortgage crisis were also very complicated and secretive, and that both of those things sort of benefit from, in their own way, how difficult it is to understand them, so that, when a smart finance person says like, oh no, don't worry, it just works, it just does the thing, and you'll make some money, it may be worth asking some questions about, why is it not important to understand how it works? And what I didn't mean to suggest is that high-frequency trading is materially related to, or in some ways caused, the subprime mortgage crisis. So just want to clear that up. Joshua Dawes and Macecurb both point out that the base level high frequency trading tactic that we described is an example of what's called arbitrage, which is something that has been around in markets for as long as there have been markets. Put as sort of simply as possible, arbitrage is buying and selling an asset in a short amount of time such that you sort of make a very quick and immediate profit. And in another comment, Joshua Dawes describes how this is done with currency, and that there is a way for you to purchase an amount of currency and then sell that currency in such a way that you will immediately make more money out of just having had money but moved it around a little bit. And there's also some talk about how, trying to predict as confidently as possible what the market is going to do before it's done, before it happens, is, again, also a very old tactic, as old as markets. And I think one of the things that we could have done is talked about how the sort of arbitrage that we described in the episode, with a trader being able to see something in one place before the information makes it to another place, as the base level, high frequency trading tactic, is we could have gone one step further to talk a little bit more about how then, building on that knowledge, you start to get into very, very complex ways of people sort of playing with the market and engaging in transactions that are trying to sort of tease information out of where the market is heading and how it works, that are based entirely on how fast they are. And that if they have that speed, there are certain very complicated things that they're able to do. But that on the base level, the sort of seeing where the market's heading and trying to intercept that information is itself nothing new. What is new is the speed. And I think that there is maybe a little bit of a disagreement, and I think that this is a widespread disagreement and is reflected in sort of what we discussed, which is some people think that this should be a regulated process, and some people think this is a natural effect of, just how markets work and how money changes over time, and that, is that speed something new? Is it, in fact, a material change that changes the way markets work? And I think that, you can see people saying, like Joshua Dawes says, it's there have always been people in trading and in markets who have more resources than others. At one point it was a spyglass, and now it is co-location and knowledge of algorithms and high-frequency trading tactics. And then, of course, there is, I think, the counter-argument that there is a point at which the expertise needed to engage in high-frequency trading is such a narrow band of expertise that the number of people who are capable of attaining it is necessarily much, much smaller than the number of people who could do something like purchase a spyglass. But, I think that's comparing those two historical sort of situations is complicated and deserving of more time than we have in a comment response video. Macecurb does bring up that even though things are capable of moving very quickly, when lots and lots of money is moving around, especially when we're talking about big organizations, there is still a human-related bottleneck that people need to sign things and make decisions, and decisions can only be made so fast and so carefully, and that the number of the number of organizations that are actually doing this kind of breakneck speed, computer-powered, even like AI level high-frequency trading is relatively concentrated and relatively small. And while that is the case, I think that this is the thing that we're sort of trying to get at, which is that as that becomes a larger percentage of the trades that are happening on any given day, does that then, like Macecurb suggests it could, threaten to change the way that markets move and whether or not individuals then have any kind of control or input into, these monetary systems. Kieran Ryder asks a really good question and sort of posits that it is not a one-to-one relationship between the pace of life and the pace of money, but that there are other factors that include technology, and that it is not just that people determine the sort of shape and then pace of money and then ask it to do things. It is available technologies in a kind of grander sense give impressions or ideas about what's possible, and then there's this feedback loop between all three. And I think that this is, pretty close to how I feel about this, and that it's a good way of thinking about it because it doesn't place the responsibility or the sort of determining of anything in one specific place, on any one actor's or area's shoulders. And I think it also reflects a lot of the truth of how technology related to investment, especially this sort of bleeding edge stuff, is moving forward, and that these people, a lot of these firms and a lot of the people who are doing this kind of work are looking for talent coming from, physics. Like they want physicists and mathematicians and engineers, and people from outside the finance world, because those people sort of will know the limits of what is currently possible, period, and not just possible within how finance business is done. So yeah, I think this is a pretty astute observation. Mattilda and a couple other people pointed out that the UK is in fact issuing new coins that have corners, which I had no idea about. I knew that they were issuing new pound coins, but had no idea that they were going to be angular in any way. And actually, I talked with Ian McKinnon about this on Twitter for a little bit, and he estimated that it will be, he did a Google and found that it would be 80 million pounds to upgrade all of the machinery that takes coins to deal with the new shape. And he also posted a picture, which we'll put a link in the description, where, the coins themselves actually they look pretty round. Like they have corners, but they look pretty round. Either way, it's, an interesting development. I've heard that the reason that this was done is because the pound coin is amongst the most counterfeited pieces of currency in the world. It's in either the top 3 or the top 5, and that, there's a bunch of anti-counterfeiting measures that are in the new coin, including the fact that it's not perfectly round. Your second Plan B links us to a related Saturday morning breakfast cereal comic about the, depending upon how you look at figurative or maybe even literal arms race that is related to the speed of money and monetary exchange, as usual. The compiler makes the case that it is not the speed of life that is affected by the nature of money, but it is rather the size of a society. And I think that this, in a way, stands to reason, and that one, in one's local community, especially, if one has the luxury of being able to select that local community and, go wherever they want, you can sort of remove yourself from the effects of a sort of intense market capitalism, but that having money sort of shed its solid form, like we talked about in the episode, does, it might allow it to move faster, but it also allows it to go more places, and that in a lot of ways you can, pick your metaphor, shrinks the globe or increases one's ability to act and increases the overall reach of, a modern sort of market-based economy. And I think this is, I think this is all to say, good point. Thomas S. points to a study that shows the overall decrease in what is called the velocity of money, which is the sort of number of currency exchanges that happen, during a given period, and that since 2008, since the financial crisis, has actually declined. And I saw a couple people actually bringing this up in the comments, saying that velocity of money is the phrase that the video needed, and that we were missing this sort of like technical term. And actually, I had talked about it a little bit while we were writing it, and I think I wanted to avoid it for a specific reason. Which is that though we talk about Georg Simmel saying that the more transactions that happen, the more fast-paced life is, I think what we're trying to get at is not necessarily that day-to-day transactions, like you paying money for objects, you sort of like out in the world spending cash. Not talking about that in relationship to speed, but talking about the operations of markets and the sort of highly technical or much more abstracted ideas of value and wealth, and how those are related to speed. And so, yeah, that's why we sort of didn't get into this, because I think that this is a related but distinct conversation, and maybe we didn't draw a fine enough line between the two. That there's sort of like speed of day-to-day transactions, speed of people spending their pocket money, and then there is the actual literal speed of information in moving money in the world of finance around. And while those things have effects on one another, they are not the same thing. And I think we're trying to ask how this thing might affect a sort of larger shift, or like a larger set of attitudes that people over here in the if we're making the Wall Street, Main Street distinction, might end up somehow paying the price for. But yeah, I realize that is maybe a thing that could have been spelled out, and this is the kind of stuff that we run into 15-minute videos, trying to figure out what's worth explaining and what's not. It's always a struggle.